feel privileged being a photographer and being able to see scenes like this and record them because I feel like I'm seeing history. I like sitting on a corner and watching the world go by. I got what's called Marco Polo fever. I became obsessed. Everything Marco wrote or talked about.
I'm going to retrace his steps.
One of the most interesting pieces of the Zheng He puzzle is how he got from a rural farming village in Yunnan to become China's greatest seafaring explorer.
Greetings from Venice, Italy. My name is Farland Chang. Venice here is the start of the Silk Road, the ancient trade route linking east and west. Venice is also home to one of the world's greatest explorers, Marco Polo. His overland Silk Road journey comes to life through Michael Yamashita's masterful photography. And from land to sea, Michael also captures the maritime Silk Road as he retraces the epic voyages of one of the world's greatest naval explorers, Zheng He, from the east. Join Nat Geo's own intrepid explorer on his journeys along the Silk Road, and join our cause to illuminate and protect the wonder of our world.
"2,000 monks, heads shaven, beards shaven, eating tsampa and worshiping their gods. It's as like nothing has changed here in the 700 years. I come here, I feel like I'm seeing exactly what Marco saw.
Oh my gosh, how's that?
Yeah. Look, the sun's almost ready to pop.
Isn't that nice?
Traveling to new lands, exploring new cultures, and sharing their discoveries with the world. That pursuit is what brings our two subjects together, Marco Polo and Michael Yamashita. And Michael Yamashita, the National Geographic photojournalist who has become one of the world's greatest visual storytellers.
I love the way everybody participates. You got all the kids in here as well, looking forward to the feast afterwards. These guys look like regular surgeons.
In this program, get ready to enjoy stunning highlights from Mike's 3-year assignment. With his cameras, Mike is the only photojournalist ever to retrace Marco's epic travels from Italy to China.
And all this human interaction, and that's what turns me on. And those are the pictures that I'm going for.
Marco's 13th century travels are known to
visually documenting the legendary route through fascinating countries such as Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka.
We're here, the top of Adams Peak for sunrise. Every explorer from Marco Polo to Ibn Battuta has been up here.
Much that Marco recorded has not changed. We will move on his trail along an old Silk Road route which winds through impressive mountain ranges. Or look for a hot spring whose waters had been strongly recommended by him 7 centuries ago.
That nice S-curve going up the hill there. Look at that. Isn't that something?
In China, we will follow him across deserts or through metropolitan streets swarming with people. Was it all truth or fiction? Was it real or imagination?
Being a photographer and being able to see scenes like this and record them, because I feel like I'm seeing history and putting it on film, seeing something that won't be here in another 3 or 4 years.
Join us now in search of the answer. Marco Polo, a photographer's journey, with Michael Yamashita in his own words.
This is beautiful.
Unbelievable.
As a Japanese American, I grew up interested in the Far East. I studied Asian history in college, and now I'm going to get the chance to see a lot of that history come alive. Well, I've always been interested in Marco Polo, but what really got me and deepened my intrigue was reading an article questioning whether he actually made it to China or not. And I thought, wouldn't this be the opportunity to prove once and for all that he made it or didn't make the trip? That is the question.
I then read a book by Dr. Francis Wood, curator of the Chinese collection at the British Library, who argues that Marco fabricated the stories in his book. I'm going to retrace his steps, using his book like a guide, and make up my own mind. So whether you become a believer or not, what you're about to see is one of the most amazing overland journeys ever made.
So here we are in Basra, famous for its Muslim architecture, and as you can, or Arabesque, I don't know exactly what you call this, but as you can see, it's wonderful, wonderfully detailed, but it's also in tremendous decay, which is way too bad. This is has been neglected for quite a long time. And again, that old adage about not shooting in midday, this again is midday, but I've managed to use the shadow here to, in the case, to make this an interesting architecture picture by taking the two women wearing their burqa and photographing them in shadow, and get these two nice shapes here against this background of beautiful architecture. Again, using what I have available to me in terms of the light. Marco always talking about religion. This is in Yazd, a mosque situation, and
I have to also say that I'm not sure if these mosques actually have survived, because there was a huge earthquake a few years later after it was there, and I'm not sure if this particular one has survived. This is the Jame Mosque. Very lucky. I like to say photographers are paid to be lucky, and here I am on top of a roof. I have no idea where the sun's going to go down. I have a limited distance to walk and set up my picture because it's on a rooftop. And as I'm watching the sun, I realize it's going to set right on the top of that dome, and sure it has, and I've caught the sun just as it's hitting the horizon, just perfectly in the middle of the top of the dome. Photographers are paid to be lucky. They couldn't plan this one any better. So, if you look at this little detail, you can see by this detail that I have taken this wide-angle view, and that same morning, not more than an hour or so later, I took this picture with a very long lens to emphasize the wall, and here's why. In this plain, there are a number of villages and towns which have lofty walls of mud, made as a defense against the banditti, who are very numerous and are called Karanoas. Remember this picture. It's important because he talks about a lofty wall of mud, maybe 100 foot high. Now here, I'm really beginning to believe in Marco Polo. All those pictures that I was able to find, all those situations that he describes so accurately. And here we go again. So I'm in the middle of absolutely nowhere, in the middle of the desert, and we are in this tiny little town outside of Bam, and I'm asking somebody in this village, you know, there was this guy, Marco Polo, who came here 700 years ago, and he talks about a hot spring that's somewhere in this vicinity. And in this village, they said, well, no, there's no hot spring here, so, okay, strike out. Go down the road another 20, 30 kilometers, and we ask the same question again, and this guy tells us, oh, yeah, well, if you go down this road here, so many kilometers, turn right, go out into, follow the road, you'll find a hot spring. There it is, exactly where Marco Polo said it would be. We find this incredible hot spring running through the desert, and the most amazing thing is it's bright green because of the mineral content. I think it was copper or something. It's made it this color. And again, photographer's luck. I happen to be there at the right time of day, as you can see by the shadow. Again, it's midday, but photographers know that if you're going to shoot water, like if you're going to the Caribbean to shoot that blue-green water, the best time to see the best color is midday. And same thing here. The sun is coming straight down, and I have this streak of green water running through this dry desert. And I wouldn't have had that color, same color, if I was here any other time of the day. But the main point is, Marco Polo, again, hits it just right. He's so accurate. He says there's going to be a hot spring here, and here it is. Let's see what he says. On the road by which we return from Hormuz to Kerman, you meet with some very fine plains, and you also find many natural hot baths. The baths that I have mentioned have excellent virtues. They cure the itch and several other diseases. This became the cover of the magazine, and for many reasons. But let me tell you about the taking of this picture, because it's this typical situation that we get in. So I started really becoming a believer in Marco Polo in Iran. He actually talks about these black-skinned people that live on the Persian Gulf in a place called Bandar Abbas. Well, we knew they were there, and we knew that they had these red masks covering that all women must wear in Iran by law. And this is the most unique anywhere in the country. It makes a great picture. So I was there knowing, it was a great subject. Marco Polo talked about it. It was just really photogenic. So I'm shooting for an afternoon. And I had women in the village. Every time I'd run into somebody, I'd ask them, "Can I photograph you?" I had mud huts. I had them in windows. I had them in doorways. Walking back to the car, fairly satisfied that I had something good. I see this woman sitting down by the stream, washing some dishes. Maybe it was clothes. I can't remember. But she turns up to me like this, and I just, my reflex just picked up the camera, boom, 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 shot 6 frames. All those rolls that I'd shot the afternoon of posed portraits, none of them came close to this frame. We threw all those pictures out, and this one gesture in the good light, looking directly at me with those white eyes and the black skin. My job was to make pictures, and I saw this beautiful net in the middle of the Persian Gulf. We're out there in a boat looking for Arab dhows, like the kind Marco Polo would have been looking for to sail to China. And just as he couldn't find anything seaworthy, in my case, I couldn't find anything made of anything but plastic, because today's Arab dhows, there are very few of them, and all of them seem to be made of fiberglass. So I couldn't find my subject. Instead, I found this. I took this picture of a weir net, and just happens to be one of my favorites. Photographer's luck again. I'm looking to illustrate this. The residents avoid living in the cities, for the heat in summer is so great that it would kill them. Hence they go out to sleep where there are streams and plenty of water. When they perceive that wind coming, they plunge into water up to the neck, and so abide until the wind has ceased. And I'm walking down the beach, and here's this kid hanging out in the water, completely wet. This is the picture we ended up publishing, and it is a fiberglass fishing boat in a very modern setting with a tractor bringing it in from the sea. So I photographed it at sunset so that it would be in silhouette, and this is how we told the story of Marco arriving at the Persian Gulf, not finding a boat, and therefore going overland.
Marco Polo left Venice in 1271, traveling through Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan before he finally arrived here about 3 years later, the Pamir Mountains between China and Afghanistan. I'm sure that this would have been one of the more arduous legs of Marco's journey. He probably traveled here in winter because in his book he had written that in the mountains, flying birds there are none. In that case, Marco would have had to deal with blizzards and avalanches, and as if that weren't bad enough, he claimed that up here, there was neither habitation nor shelter.
'Tis said to be the highest place in the world, and when you have got to this height, you find a great lake between 2 mountains, and out of it a fine river running through a plain clothed with the finest pasture in the world.
Cool breeze, soft sunlight, and unbelievable scenery. Just doesn't get any better than this.
As Marco made his way through China, he encountered on more than a few occasions a rather unusual custom. and I imagine it would have made his eyes pop, especially since he was still only a teenager.
Now, I don't know if this is the village or not, but one thing I've been noticing is how good looking these women really are. Now, these are Kyrgyz people, right?
Yes, there.
This is so beautiful here, and there's only these two families.
That's true, yeah.
And I imagine that this work they're doing here is making these same carpets that they're sitting on over here?
Yes, it's their job.
Okay. At least half a dozen places throughout the book. He talks about meeting some tribe where when the visitor arrives, the husband allows the visitor to do what he may with the wife as well as the daughter. How old is she?
She's 60.
What's her name?
Snozimita? Miken.
Tell her she's very pretty.
Mom datıda siz bek çıraylıkken datıda.
If a foreigner comes to the house of one of these people to lodge, the host is delighted and desires his wife to put herself entirely at the guest's disposal. Obviously, the country is a fine one to visit for a lad from 16 to 24.
Now, Chinese scholars have actually confirmed that the practice of sharing wives and daughters with foreign visitors was indeed an ancient tradition in remote areas. The theory being that it helped widen the gene pool, avoiding the threat of marriages between blood relations.
China. Marco's finally going to make it to China. This is in Xinjiang, the westernmost province of China. It's in the Pamirs. It's Taxkorgan. And then the mountain is called Mustagata, the father of all mountains. Or was it the mother of all mountains? I don't remember. But this is what it looks like. As you can see, it's a glacier, and I got great light. Yurts. Marco talks about living in yurts, and this is one where it got that good. For me, what makes it about this picture is the fire and that great smoke that's in the air and identified or intensified by the light coming through the hole in the top of the tent. Their houses are circular and are made of wands covered with felts. They are carried along with them wherever they go, for the wands are so strong bound together and likewise so well combined that the frame can be made very light. It's talking about the Mongols and their tents.
So, Abdul, what I'm really looking for here is a traditional family, and I need you to ask them if they've ever seen the fabled Ovis Poli, you know, the huge Marco Polo sheep with curly horns.
There are great quantities of wild sheep of huge size. Their horns are as much as 6 palms in length.
It's as we like.
Okay. Can you ask Emmett Big about one thing? You know, Marco Polo was here and he talked about the big sheep, big horned sheep that were in the Pamir Mountains. Has he ever seen one?
Marco Polo bir qo'yni ko'ribdi ekan. Ashu Pamir qo'y ekan bu. Negiz shunda yo'g'il kelgan bek cho'mga qo'y. Shuni ko'rib baqqanmi dedi ashna qo'yilni. Cho'ng qo'yilni. Ko'rgan yes, he saw.
How big is that sheep?
Qancha cho'nglikda qo'y? Like look, just like donkey.
Just like a donkey, okay.
Well, I never saw one live, but I did find this set of horns on the other side of the Pamirs in Afghanistan. Just like a donkey. Marco certainly didn't exaggerate on this one.
Thank her very much for thank them all for their hospitality. Rahmat. Thank you very much. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
distances that he describes. Sometimes he's right on, incredibly accurate, and other times he's way off. But the miracle for me is to think what he wrote about was 20 years after he actually made the trip. As you can see, I'm in a schoolyard. I'm shooting this picture of these cute kids, not paying any attention to the photographer. Of course, all wearing red, which is terrific. People say, well, how come they're not making faces at you, doing what kids normally do, especially this age? Well, the reason is they can't see me. And as you can see by the shadow, the sun is directly behind me. So what are they looking at? They're looking at a big orange sphere and a silhouette. They can't see I'm a photographer. They can't see who I am. They just see a shadow. So I shot this picture with all the girls on one wall. All the girls wear red. And did I mention that all the boys wear blue? What a place. Photographer's dream. Odd weather. So it's snowing again in the middle of an area that rarely do you see snow, and in the middle of a month when you never see snow. So I'm looking for subject. We're sitting there in the middle. I'm looking for subject desperately because the weather is so beautiful. It's so unusual, and we're driving down the road, and suddenly I see all these people on the streets. The reason they're there, they're as surprised as I am. They want to see what's going on with all this snow. So all these factory workers have come out of the factory and are standing in the middle of the road, and thank God for that guy with the red umbrella that gives me the focal point. He enters the picture, slight bit of color in all this gray, black and white, and I have my picture.
There are a good number of towns and villages, but the greatest and finest is Kashgar itself.
Well, Kashgar is arguably the biggest market in Asia, and it was a big market, obviously, in Marco Polo's day. As he puts it, there's a wealth of goods here, and merchants travel from Kashgar all over the world. The feel of this place is definitely, for me, 13th century. What hasn't changed are the people and the faces and the bargaining and all this human interaction, and that's what turns me on. And those are the pictures that I'm going for. This, the donkey section, it seems to be contain the most characters. I think it's because donkeys are like a very basic form of transportation, and therefore you get very basic people here. Great faces, seemingly much more than any other part of the market. And the great thing about shooting here is nobody seems to pay any attention to you while you're shooting, because they're all so intent on the work at hand, which is buying and selling their donkeys. So I'm able to walk around here and shoot without anybody really caring that this camera's in their face.
Here's a perfect situation for photographing people. These are Uyghurs. Marcos loves, of course, being a merchant, would understand these guys, and they are bargaining hard over sheep. I think this was a sheep livestock market. They can't even see me, even though I'm only standing 2 feet from them. I have a wide-angle lens on them, banging away, shooting these pictures in front of them while they're doing their thing. And as you can see, these Uyghurs love to bargain very up close and personal. They've got a different sense of space.
I did a picture like this in Afghanistan, same thing, throwing the weed up. And I always choose an angle where I'm right in the middle of the action. So I almost want to be right in the scene so you can feel the wind and feel that dust in your face. It hides and reveals at the same time. Marco talks about wheat, perfect illustration, plus, as you know, my job is to make whatever picture of an ordinary situation look a lot more than ordinary. I love that, I just love that dust.
What I love about old Kashgar is this feeling that things haven't changed much here in the last 1,000 years or so. I like sitting on a corner and watching the world go by. The women with the veils over their head, these donkey carts coming by. I feel privileged being a photographer and being able to see scenes like this and record them because I feel like I'm seeing history and putting it on film, seeing something that won't be here in another 3 or 4 years.
Marco continues along the famous Silk Road. And one of the most important commodities around here, of course, is silk, which gave the road its name. Now, most silk exported from China today is made in factories, but of course we wanted to find silk being made the traditional way, the way it would have been produced during Marco's time. We found what we were looking for in the villages around Hotan.
Billy, what's going on here?
This is called silk boiling. So they boil the cocoon in this pot about 15 minutes, and then it becomes very soft. So the lady find the head of the thread, do the silk reeling. From one cocoon, they can get about 800 meters of the
800 meters.
of raw silk.
Wow.
What happens to the worms? Are people still eating those worms?
Yes, people still eat the worms, also make the soy sauce, also make soap.
Do you like the taste?
No.
I'm not fond of it myself. I've never seen that before in my life. Are you watching this? Goli, can you explain to me what's going on here? Can you explain to me what she's doing with this?
This is a cornstarch. Make the silk stiff.
It makes it stiff.
Yes, stiff.
Wow. I've never seen that. That was great. Another lucky moment. Photographers are paid to be lucky. This guy with his falcon. It's an important picture because Marco Polo describes all the falconry going on, and who has the best falcons, because that was the big sport of the Mongols. And again, just by some luck, and then his grandson walks into the back of the picture, and bango, I have another picture that elevates it above all the others. This is the one we ran. Dust storms. Wow, he described dust storms, and I was praying for dust storms. Most people want to put their camera away when they see one, but photographers need to pull it out and use that to photograph this very odd and difficult situation, because most everybody runs away from dust storms, so it's hard to find a subject. And there I was on the top of this hill, and the wind comes blowing in, and my subject was right in front of me. So I got this picture, which is something that Marco described and must have gone through a lot of these. Well, you know, the camera is nothing but, to a carpenter, a hammer is a tool. To a photographer, the camera is also just a tool, and it's a replaceable one, even though it's rather expensive, but they are insured. So I would if I could get the picture, that's the most important thing. And sometimes you have to sacrifice the well-being of your camera to the need of getting the photograph. So I shoot in the rain, I shoot in the snow, I shoot in all kinds of weather where you're not supposed to pull your camera out, because that's why I buy the best cameras and the strongest ones, because I expect them to hold up.
When travelers are on the move by night, and one of them chances to lag behind, he will hear spirits talking, and will suppose them to be his comrades, and thus shall a traveler be led astray, so that he never finds his party, and in this way many have perished.
Well, here I am in the Taklamakan, the hottest and driest desert in all of China.
Gives you a real appreciation for what Marco Polo must have gone through, spending 2 months crossing over this same wasteland of sand. 100-degree heat, you're always feeling dry, you're never quite comfortable. It's the sand that's itching or the sweat that's dripping down your brow. It must have been the hardest part of his journey.
The cover, a very important picture, Marco Polo crossing the desert. Let me tell you about this story, because it might surprise you. So I get to this sand dune in Dunhuang. It's very famous. It must have been even famous in Marco's day, because They call it the singing sand dune. And he's the first to describe the sound of the wind as it comes over the top of this sand dune, 1,000 foot high. And he says it sounds like singing. So this is the singing sand dunes of Dunhuang. It's one of the highest in the world at 1,000 feet. And anyway, I got there and I was just totally disappointed because when I first saw the scene, yes, it was a beautiful dune, but there were also several hundred camels at the base of it and several hundred tourists waiting to get on those camels and travel around this large dune. And I thought, like, oh my God, how am I going to make a picture out of this? Well, we got back in the Land Cruiser and drove around the mountain, and I started seeing the possibilities as it got later in the day, as I looked at the backlight, and I thought, I need to backlight this situation. So we waited till, this must be about 5 o'clock. The sun's at about 45-degree angles. It's coming up over the top of the dune, cresting, making these very nice shapes as it crests over the top of these dunes. And here come the travelers. I won't call them tourists at this point, but and unfortunately, all those camels have numbers on them: 206, 105, 33, 98. So I thought, how do I get those out of the picture? Well, I underexposed, so I shot it backlit. The sun is coming over the top. These camels, therefore, are in shadow. And I get this picture of Marco Polo crossing the Taklamakan. And you can't see the numbers and the fact that there are 6 tourists there on a well-trod trail being led around the mountain. But as I said, my job is to give you the sense of travel in the 13th century, so I think I did my job.
I think it's important to show not only what Marco described, but what he didn't describe, and try to come to some answer as to why he didn't describe it. I'm looking for the famous village with the women with the bound feet. Now, bound feet women don't exist everywhere in China because it was banned about 100 years ago. But in these far-off provinces and faraway villages, there still exist quite a few of these women who are now in their 80s and 90s. This particular village is famous because they formed a troupe called the Little Feet Dancing Troupe, so I know they're here. Now, one of the biggest arguments by those non-believers in Marco Polo is this bound foot issue. However, I think he did talk about it. He describes the women's gait as being very dainty, and that each step is only a hair's breadth in front of the next step. That, to me, is describing the way a bound-foot woman walks. The other thing is, he would not have seen them since they all wore long dresses in those days. And therefore, in my opinion, for sure, he talks about the bound feet without ever having seen them.
May I understand these women have the smallest feet in the village?
Yeah.
Can you ask how old was she when they bound her feet?
哦，奶奶几岁开始割？就很小时候就开始割了。
我小姑娘就割了。
哦，几岁呢？哈，大概。
小姑娘15岁我都睡觉割了嘛。
4 and 5 years old.
4 and 5.
Yeah.
而且不割就那时候叫上了去。现在上了嘛，白天吃了慢慢嘛，天子可冷饭给带了去。没得会割到割些。
So at that time, the women, they have to have a very smaller, very small feet, so that they can marry a very good person, and a rich person.
Unbelievable. But what really is amazing to me is they've been able to have a pretty darn normal life. And obviously there's no shame to this. They seem to be very proud of their feet. It's just an amazing practice. I had these women ready to pose for me in front of this red door, and of course I'm shooting constantly, so as they're approaching the red door, before they're sitting down, I'm even shooting, and just so happened that after shooting a lot, same thing, a lot of rolls on this situation, the best picture was the one I shot right at the beginning, where she's standing, because those feet look just so tiny. And all the other ones I took when she was sitting down just didn't work. I had them with their grandchildren, with people with normal feet, just to show the difference. I had all kinds of portraits, and this one worked. He didn't mention cormorant fishing either. So here we are now, just 2 or 3 or 4 things he didn't talk about. They were fishing back 700 years ago like this. He probably did see it if he was here, but neglected to mention it. Then again, you can't mention everything. Maybe he just forgot. And then again, at the end on his deathbed, he did say, I've only told you half of what I've seen, so this must be one of the things that he hasn't told us. Maybe he was thinking there would be another chapter sometime. Oh yeah. Oh gosh, you see the size of that fish? Wow. But still, how do you explain Marco's most glaring omission, his failure to mention China's greatest landmark, the Great Wall? The Great Wall of China, over 2,000 years old, over 4,000 miles long. It's been built and rebuilt by countless ruling dynasties. How come Marco Polo never mentions it in his book? It's here in Jiayuguan that the mystery of Marco Polo starts to fall apart. As any China scholar can tell you, it was this wall, this 10-foot high maybe mud wall, that Marco Polo saw when he traveled through here in 1275. Now this wall is the Han Wall, built somewhere around 8200, just pretty much a lump wandering through the desert. And if I was Marco Polo, I wouldn't have paid it a second's glance, especially after the walls that he saw and commented on in places like Bam in Iran, the world's biggest citadel. The Great Wall in his day was just not great. But this is the Hushi Quarter. This is part of the Silk Road. Every traveler had to travel this way, as well as Marco, of course. And he was walking for days right alongside the Great Wall of China. So here's the Great Wall. Look at it. It's what, 10 feet high? It's made out of mud. Compare this to that 100-foot wall that I showed you in Bam, in which he talked about it, the lofty walls of mud. Why would he ever talk about this wall? It's the Ming Wall that all the tourists go to in Beijing that gives the great to the Great Wall, and that was built 300 years after Marco came this way.
This is it, end of the Great Wall. No way to go this way. No way to go that way either with the mountains. Marco Polo had to have passed through here as everybody did coming into China from the west.
By now, the Polos had traveled perhaps 1,300 miles in China, about halfway to Chengdu, and I was getting a little hungry.
So the real question for me is, did Marco Polo bring spaghetti and ravioli from Italy to China, or did he bring noodles and jiaozi from China to Italy?
All I know is I had a good time shooting noodles. I like to eat noodles. I shot a lot of noodles, and the real answer to this whole thing is that noodles and jiaozi and ravioli and it all was in both China and Italy before Marco Polo ever arrived there. It was invented by the Persians and brought there by the Arabs, so I'm told, by the highest authorities.
But for me, I don't care either way. I just like the taste of noodles. Pasta or Chinese noodles, either way, one of my favorite foods.
As we approach Inner Mongolia, I'm hoping to see the famous Mongolian horses that so impressed Marco and helped the Mongols create the biggest empire the world has ever known.
They went off to battle. They didn't have to carry oats or grain to feed the horses because the horses just lived off the land. And they, of course, lived off the horses.
You know, I need to be a little closer. Let's go this way.
They'd be on a forced march and going hungry for a couple of days. They'd actually slit the horse's vein and drink the blood as it splurted out, and then sew it up, and on they went. And you can imagine how an army of that toughness and mobility on horses could really cover ground over this flat land.
We're getting close to Xanadu, and Marco Polo must have been in great anticipation. Kublai Khan was, and I quote, "the most powerful man in people and in land
Wow, can you believe this? I've been here at least a half a dozen times, and every time I come here, I'm just totally blown away by the scale and grandeur. I feel like I'm on a movie set. And just think what Marco Polo must have felt. A small town guy, and he comes to this amazing city with over 1 million population. He must have been totally blown away. Just must have absolutely floored him to see something like this.
From Xanadu, Marco traveled to Daidu, the new city being built by the Khan. Today it's called Beijing, and you can still find Marco's legacy in China's bustling capital.
There is not a bridge in the world to compare with it. It has 24 arches and is built entirely of gray marble.
You know, Marco Polo was totally impressed by this bridge, and he described it in a lot of detail, and therefore, to this day, his name's on it. This is the Marco Polo Bridge.
This city is beyond dispute the finest and noblest in the world.
To me, Hangzhou is a no-brainer. It was the greatest city in the world. He called it the city of heaven. And it was the London, the Paris, the Rome, the Beijing of its day. So, of course, a young guy is going to be interested in hanging out here and in describing it in great detail. When Marco described this, it was pretty much the first time anybody ever described aquaculture, and that was 700 years ago. They raise the fish here in the lake and then take them on a regular basis, and he thought it was amazing that people had a full-time living as fishermen. So I guess fishermen in Venice would only go out on occasion or something. And for him, it was a big deal that these guys made a living just fishing.
One of the reasons people didn't believe him is he came back with tales just like this. Oh yeah, over there in a place called China, there are 1 million people living in the city, and they catch their fish several times a year by growing the fish in the lake. Nobody had heard of aquaculture before. So, of all things, they're still doing that. And of all things, I happen to be there just when I'm walking along the shore, and I look out and I see a bunch of fishermen. Not only that, by the time I get in the boat and find a boat, get over there, they're just hauling in the catch. While working on behalf of the Great Khan, Marco Polo traveled to the remotest parts of the empire, encountering many strange people, but none that he relished more than those of the land they call Tibet.
Men of extraordinary abstinence. All their life long, they eat nothing but bran, which they take mixed with hot water. That is their food. Bran, and nothing but bran.
I'm in a Tibetan village above Lebrang Monastery, and I'm sitting down with a bunch of young lamas about to have breakfast. What we're looking at here is some yak butter tea. That's the yak butter. Big chunk of it into my smoky tea. And this is the staple of the Tibetan diet. Not bad. Kind of like rancid
milk on top of smoky tea. Okay, and so he's putting in some Zampa, which is bran. Marco Polo describes this. He describes the llamas as eating nothing but this bran. Okay, well, why don't you guys make me one? I don't think I've got quite the skill. Marco also talks about how dirty the Tibetans are. And the fact that they only wash maybe once a year. However, they definitely have to use their hands to make this tsamba. Well, I think that's enough for that. And here's my favorite picture of this situation. It's snowing. They're all hunkered down in the snow as it's snowing, and the snow being white is kicking up all this good light into their faces. So everybody's sort of individually lit, and you can see all the detail of those faces thanks to the weather conditions. And also the wonderful thing about seeing a print is that you can study it. Unlike a TV video where everything's moving around, you can sit here and look at all those faces. Here's a guy eating something, somebody else with prayer beads, some guy giving me the evil eye. But you can stay with this picture for a long time just looking at different faces.
They have immense minsters and abbeys, some of them as big as a small town, with more than 2,000 monks in a single abbey. These monks have the head and beard shaven.
Well, this is why Marco was called, or so-called, Milione. People couldn't believe his figures because there were always tens of thousands, and the cities, the populations, the number of boats, the number of bridges, they were always so much bigger than any numbers that existed in Europe at the time. Who ever heard of a church in Europe with 2,000 monks praying at one time?
Printing press. I didn't have a lot of light. I chose to blur the action, so I get this nice soft blur of color, yet you can still see what actually is going on as they're putting down the paper and sliding the ink across it. The most extreme form of prayer, Chiak, is probably the most demanding form of pilgrimage in the world. Prostrating themselves fully, worshippers cover tens, sometimes hundreds of miles. Well, think of the photographer who needs to, every time that woman hit the ground, so did I, trying to get the picture of this very extreme form of worship. I'd run in front of her a few steps, get down, and hope that she would decide to do it right in front of me. But I had to be lower than she was, so I am lying flat on the ground, as you can see here.
Sometimes Marco's describing things obviously from first hand. This is one of them. He had to have known these people and been here to so enthusiastically describe them. There are other places along the route where he's talking about cities that he passes by with 2 or 3 sentences. But a place like this, he obviously has been here because you can just read the enthusiasm.
A great landscape depends on great light, and that was one such day. I think that's why photographers sometimes think they have a direct connection with somebody up there. Things happen and you're standing and walking at a scene and suddenly the light comes down. We like to call those God rays, like God has just sent them down just for us to see and therefore photograph. But that is one of those occasions. Boom, just where you want it lit.
Sometimes photographers have big egos because they think somehow God is on their side. Why did he decide to send the light down just when I have the right camera in my hands? Oh my gosh, isn't that nice? One, two looks better than one. 3, closer up. 4, more light. 5, bigger but less light. So I'm going to take this. Certainly, some of the things Marco described does confound the imagination. He claimed he saw people who dined on raw flesh. This I had to see for myself. On behalf of the great Mongol leader Kublai Khan, Marco Polo traveled to Yunnan in southern China, encountering many minority tribes. One thing that astounded him was the fact that the people here ate their meat raw, and obviously they still do, but I was surprised to find that the animal they love eating raw happens to be pork, which is such a no-no. I've learned from childhood that pork always has to be well cooked, and here these people for 700 years have been eating raw pork, and as you can see by the healthy faces around here, they don't look much the worse for it. I love the way everybody participates. You got all the kids in here as well, looking forward to the feast afterwards. So now they need to burn this pig just to singe the hair and to sort of sterilize the skin. Okay, now we got all the women involved in this part. It's interesting to see the roles. Obviously, the men control the fire. These guys look like regular surgeons.
People of that country eat their meat raw and put in a sauce of garlic and spices, and so eat it just as we eat meat that is dressed.
Not bad. How come you guys aren't eating? Try something. These women are kind of beefy, you know. I think, I shouldn't say beefy, wrong word. They look like they're well fed, and I assume they must eat quite a big diet of pork here. I always say that I can pretty much eat whatever anybody else is eating anywhere in the world, and I trust that those healthy faces tell me that that meat is perfectly safe, so I'm not worried about it. And anyway, it was an experience. I don't think I'd make it a regular part of my menu, but in the interests of Marco Polo, I knew that I had to eat it. After so many years in China, the Polos must have been feeling homesick. Marco, only 17 when he set out from Venice, was now 37. He knew that Kublai Khan's health was failing and his regime was losing its grip on power. We're in Zhejiang, Venice to the east. My favorite time of the day, sunrise. The colors are warm, the light is soft, and everybody's waking up and doing what they do in the morning. We like to call it magic hour because good things happen with the light. And this particular town really fits Marco's description of Suzhou. He talked about the 2,000 bridges and canals all over the city of Suzhou. And here we have at least 100 still left. So this is my image of the way Suzhou looked back 700 years ago. And you can see how he must have felt right at home, and maybe that's the reason why he spent so much time in this area. It just felt like home.
I'm in Suzhou, and I'm looking across the Grand Canal. I've chosen to be there at sunset. I am standing on the road with a very long lens. I have chosen this location. I've chosen the time to be there, and who could have ever predicted that that woman would walk precisely down the middle of this with those two buckets at sunset, and I get this picture just before the boat comes into the picture and ruins it all also. So photographer's luck. That's all I can say. Being there at the right time, right place. So we got him to China, and I showed all these pictures to my editors, and they said, you know, we can't leave Marco Polo in China. We've got to take him home. Nobody's ever done that. Nobody's even attempted to do it. Most people say, oh, we'll do Marco Polo in China, or we'll do Marco Polo from Venice to China. Nobody has ever completed any of the, well, the one in China is probably fairly easy, but the one Venice to China is fairly impossible. I don't know of any others who have ever done that. And certainly nobody has ever done from China back to Iran, so we thought we'd try. And so they gave me another couple of months, and I headed first for Vietnam, where this would have been his first landing. Everybody who travels the Sea Silk Road, the water route back to Europe, would be going along the South China Sea, following the trade wind. So the first place you land is always Vietnam, because that's where the monsoon's going to blow you. It starts in December, blows you down the coast. You end up in Vietnam, and so did I. Vietnam's a very favorite place of mine, as I shot many pictures there back in the 90s. Very friendly people. I ended up adopting my daughter from Vietnam. Here's, of course, he's traveling by boat, and so he stayed on the coast, as did I. Here's a wonderful little village where they do shrimp, and I just happened to get this very translucent tray of of squid there with the light coming through. Again, I shoot by necessity when things are happening, and that is not necessarily in the best light, but again, you use that to your advantage, and this light, it works. Anything that he might have seen, I shoot, and this is a very interesting form of fishing, which I was dying to do. These guys have these long stilts on. They walk out in the water, and they use their dip net, so they can get deep out in the water there and get better catches. And happened to be there at the best time of the day, sunrise. The light is sublime. It's soft. It's very directional, and color-wise, it's really warm. So photographers like to call early morning, the 30 minutes before. This is a few minutes before the sun's actually out, and 30 minutes after as magic hour. And likewise in the afternoon, 30 minutes before sunset and 30 minutes after sunset. are called the same magic hour. And these are the times of day that are best for photography because of that quality of that light. But as I was saying, this is not a reason to put your camera away in the rest of the day either. But especially for landscapes, that is the time you want to be there. So I get up for every sunrise and I'm there for every sunset.
This is the moment you live for. And that, my friends, whoever's listening, is a moment. Look at that. Oh God, and look at that, right in between there, we still have light. And I'm gonna go for this, because again, I love this misty fog that's rolling in.
In a rice go down, great light, lots of movement. I'm using a very slow shutter speed, maybe 1/8 of a second. I'm throwing in a little strobe to lighten those faces, and also the strobe has the effect of sharpening the subject, especially when they're moving around that much. So I get this mixture of blur and movement thanks to the strobe. He goes to Cambodia, goes up to Mekong. To take this picture looks very simple, but how do you get the separation between these two boats? Well, the only way to do it is by getting on a boat as high as possible so that these, if you're on water, these two boats would just sort of meld with each other and to be lost in the shadow of this palm tree background. Knowing that, I hired the biggest boat I could find to get up on the highest part of it, and then I remember I put a bunch of bed frames on top of the deck to get even higher in order to separate these two boats against the black background and put them against instead this very golden water again at sunrise. Have the idea for the picture first and then go out and execute. And then all the rest of the picture depends on the body English of the guys whacking the nets. South China Sea. So I went all the way to South China Sea just to see that water, to get a contrast with the rest of the story, which doesn't have water like that. Mostly, as you saw in Vietnam, are much murkier colored water. I knew I was going to find this in the Philippines, and he talks about the Philippines and its thousands of islands, and there we were, shot at midday. As I was saying before, if you want the color to stay in the water, shoot at midday with a Polaroid. Okay, here's a fun picture because I was shooting in Indonesia, and on the island of Sumatra, Marco's blown there by the trades, and he never leaves the coastline because he's afraid of the Bataks. And who are the Bataks? Well, they were cannibals. Unfortunately for pictures, they of course are no longer cannibals. They don't eat human beings, but in fact they've become all Christian. And while I was looking for a subject, I went to a wedding at a church, and I walked in. I was shooting the couple, the bride and the groom, and they were they were eating fish. And after I got these pictures, I brought them back to Washington, and my picture editor, Susan Welchman, said, "That fish looks exactly like a human hand." And that became our illustration for the man-eating Bataks.
Adams Peak. At the center of this island, it stands like a beacon of inspiration and hope. Pilgrims from all over, old and infirm, all make the brutal ascent to its summit.
Almost there. We're here, the top of Adams Peak for sunrise. Every explorer from Marco Polo to Ibn Battuta has been up here.
Whether Ibn Battuta, Marco Polo, Chang, the Chinese admiral, they all talk about Adams Peak with some reverence, because at the top of this mountain you have three religions. You got Muslims who believe the footprint that's up at the top there is Muhammad's footprint, or if you're Indian, you might believe it's Krishna's footprint, and if you're Christian, you think it's Adam's footprint. So they call it Adams Peak. You climb to the top, and you have three religions worshipping up there. In the island of Ceylon, there is an exceedingly high mountain. It rises right up so steep and precipitous that no one could ascend it, were it not that they have taken and fixed to several great and massive iron chains, so disposed that by help of these men are able to mount to the top. And they say that on this mountain is the sepulchre of Adam. Here I'm on a beach in Kerala, south of Kerala, and I'm looking at the scene of all these boats. Not one engine, not one vestige of the 21st century. Families pulling in nets from these big boats in which they use these incredibly heavy oars to get out there. Here's that same problem. If I shot on the beach, what would I get? I'd get a mass of silhouettes unseparated and all bunched together. It wouldn't have been a picture, so I'm looking for a high angle. I'm on the top of one of these, the bow of one of these boats that's beached up on the, further up the beach, and I'm shooting like crazy as the sun is coming up from the side. One of my favorite situations is, as you can see, backlight. I've showed you a lot of backlight pictures. And then I put the long lens on, and from that same perch, I'm shooting the boats as they're going back out into the water to tend to the nets. You see how heavy these oars are. Anyway, this is just long lens, long glass. And then I got the wide angle back on, and I'm shooting them as the nets are pulled in. They're in really tight. And I've got these nice hands filling the sky here, and all the men participating in pulling in the catch. And then even the little kids get involved as they get right down into the nets to pull out the littlest fish. And we thought this was a good illustration for Marco, because he says, in all of this province of Malabar, there is never a tailor to cut a coat or stitch it, seeing that everybody goes naked. There you have it. So I say goodbye to the coast of India. It's blue because the sun has just gone down. The sky is still blue. I've got that good reflected light from the sky, making the entire ocean blue. Across there is where Marco wants to go back to his homeland in the coast of Iran, where he will land and head on up to Venice. Here's the biggest cow god in all of India, and I just happened to be there on the day when they decided to pour a lot of curried milk on its head. Photographer's luck. Who knew that that was going to happen, and therefore I'd have a picture that was worth looking at as opposed to just a picture of this. Yeah, he's pouring curried milk and blessing this cow. And we were there in the morning. They said, "Oh, well, you should come back in the afternoon. There'll be several thousand people here." It was like, thank you very much. We'll be back. These people are idolaters, and many of them worship the yachts because It is a creature of such excellence. They would not eat beef for anything in the world, nor would they on any account kill an ox. I'm on my last round the world ticket, and when I was doing this story, I was on constant round the world tickets. And one of my last stops was Genoa, Italy, where I went to photograph the place where Marco Polo ended up in jail and from where he wrote his book, which he boldly called The Description of the World. I arrived there and it's pouring rain. My luck. It has this beautiful facade. I'm sitting there going like, oh my God, well, what am I going to do? What would Marco Polo do? He'd go to the local trattoria, which I did, and had a bowl of pasta, and I came out, and the sun was gloriously shining. I looked down, I saw this puddle, I saw the reflection in the puddle, and just about the same time, this bird starts flying across, and I capture the bird, the reflection, the building, and it's my ender shot. So he's in this prison, he's in this building, he happens to be paired up with this guy by the name of Rustichello. Marco Polo starts telling him this amazing tale, and Rustichello writes it down. If Rustichello and Marco Polo were not in this prison together, this book would never have been written. It was not like Marco Polo had the idea of writing a great best-selling book and therefore sat down and plagiarized or copied or took somebody else's words and threw it together because he wanted to make $1 million. No, he just happened to be in this prison with this guy Rustichello, who therefore he told a bunch of stories, and the guy wrote it down, and the thing ends up getting published, and it's the world's most popular book, and goes many editions, and every one of these people is still questioning him because he described all these things, departed more knowledge to than anyone before him or after him, gave more geographic knowledge to the world. So in the case of Marco Polo, I started, back in more than 20 years, the year 2000, retracing his roots. He gave more information, geographic information, than ever before. He was the first travel journalist. Well, I always say that Marco Polo, if he were alive today, he'd be a photographer or a writer for National Geographic, because basically that's what we do.
You know, for every argument the naysayers have about Marco, I've got an answer. And I'm the only one that's done this trip. It's one thing reading about it and figuring out where he went from a library seat back in London, but when you're out on the road, you can't help but be a big believer in Marco Polo. He's too right on.
어.